Hello there guys, it's Joey with my interesting lighting. It's going to drive me nuts, so I'm just going to try not to look too much at it because I currently look like I'm kind of vampiric. I don't know how bad it's going to be in the render. Anyway, so this video is actually really important, and I took a little time to sit and think about what I wanted to say, and I have notes to make sure I stay on what I want to say. And it's a video that is sort of a response because I did have someone come to me with this issue, and I think it's best if I just lay out what the video is and what the question was. So the video is the goddess Morrigan and LGBT, so lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender. And the reason that I am doing this video in particular is not because I am LGBT, but because I consider myself to be a friend to LGBT. However, before I get into the depth of what we're talking about and why, I am going to say up front that my personal experiences and my viewpoint are obviously from a heterosexual white female point of view, and that means that they are different to people who are actually going through any issues surrounding the sort of homophobia that's basically caused this video. And the reason being for me making this video is that I had a young person who happened to be gay, and I'm not going to mention any names of like that in this video in case, you know, people don't want their names mentioned or anything. So other than that, and they came to me and they said that somebody had told them that the goddess Morrigan would have nothing to do with them because they were gay. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute while I open this bottle of water, because this is horrendous. And this is not the first time someone's come to me with a similar question. And this week and a half, I had someone come to me about that and about mental health, which is a whole other video into itself, of people saying the goddess Morrigan will have nothing to do with you if you are X. And there are very few occasions when I will say to people, this person is just flat out wrong, but this is one of them. And I'm like, who is giving this advice? I would freaking Nora. So I disagree strongly with this perspective, and we're going to go through some thoughts, some actual history, and then sort of a spiritual viewpoint, my personal opinions. And as I said, I am not lesbian, gay, transgender or bisexual. Not that I can't appreciate women as the beauties that you are, but sexually speaking, me like the men. God, it sounds so bad when I say stuff like that, but yes, this is a perspective from me. So obviously I do not have the associated experiences and relationships and everything of a homosexual nature. So there is that, and I understand that. However, I am going to go ahead and make this video because I think it's really important. This was so important that when I first received the message, I was dead on my feet because of moving, and I made sure I responded to it because it was so... It was sad. It was so sad that somebody who felt reasonably strong in their own sexuality, they'd sort of overcome the initial problems with coming out and feeling judged and whatever. They'd got past all of that quite strongly, which they said, and then they had come into this seeking the Morrigan, seeking and feeling that they had been called, and then have someone else tell them, well, the goddess Morrigan doesn't deal with homosexuals. And I was just like, who is giving this advice? Because they need a slap. So we'll start from a historical perspective, because that's what I do. I study history for a good amount of time, and I enjoy history and researching history, even sort of quietly to myself sometimes, even though I'm not studying technically history anymore. And I was interested because I was like, I don't know what the Celtic perspective on homosexuality was, mainly because I didn't study the Celts, and I've mentioned this before, that in part of discovering who my goddess was, I think it came to me as a Celtic opening up of that point in history to go research, because I hadn't studied it before. Whereas I had studied quite a lot of mythology, archaeology and history from a lot of other ancient periods. And you know, like the ancient Egyptians, I said the other day, you know, I had dictionaries on my shelf from being very little. And ooh, robin, sorry, there's so many birds here. There's a robin on my gate. There's a robin on my back gate. I'd move it all around, but we're on tripod and it's right. So I've studied an ancient Greek and Roman stuff as well. I studied a lot of that, and then like more ancient history in England. So you know, your medieval England. I love the history of medicine. It's one of my favourites. Most periods of English history. At some point, I've had a look at Tudors. Tudors we did to death, but I still love Tudors. So. But that's by the by. I didn't know where the Celts stood offhand on this subject. I had a feeling it would probably be very similar to the Roman and Greek approach, which is that it was considered natural and just an everyday occurrence. And the problem with researching into this is that the Celtic history, if you like, has largely gleaned from other sources other than the Celts, and that means Christian monks for the best part, which aren't the most reliable and aren't unbiased in their portrayal of other cultures, and they could quite easily use it as a derogatory thing to try and make out that the Celts were uncivilized or ungodly, and I didn't want to get into any of that. So I was like, I don't want to be seeing like a very, very strict Christian monk perspective on these sorts of things. What can I find? And there are a couple of things that I found that I thought were interesting. The first one is in Breton law, if a husband was engaging regularly in homosexual activity with a male, then it was grounds for the female to divorce him on the grounds that she wasn't being sexually satisfied. So the grounds for divorce were nothing to do with the sexuality or indeed the sex. It was to do with the fact that the female was not being sexually satisfied, and under Breton law that was a term of divorce. Yay, ladies. Not getting any. Bye-bye. But I did find some interesting notes, and this is what I've got in front of me. Now, classical writers mention the widespread homosexual practice in Celtic society, especially among groups like the Gaysatarians, recruited mercenaries. And here's a quote from Anthemius. And among the barbarians, the Celts enjoy and even prefer the intimate company of young boys. So, again, we don't know what's meant by young boys, because is this bias? But it's basically a source in history saying that Celtic warriors did partake in homosexual activities. And there is, of course, the problematic nature of secondary sources. So now what I really want to bring to the fore right here is something that I thought was very important when talking about the goddess Morrigan and LGBT. In particular, this is addressing homosexual males, obviously, but we will get into a more broad perspective in a minute. Although technically this actually addresses bisexuality, this next bit. So there is a argument within historical sources that Cuchulainn, Morrigan's favourite warrior, co-bedded with his male friend or male companion Fedea. It's stated very matter-of-factly in the myths and not considered derogatory at all, and Fedea is called his bedfellow. And this falls into the literary critic argument camp of Achilles and Patroclus, which is, some people believe they were lovers and some people are like, no, they were just very good friends. But some people have, been arguing back and forth over this in all forms of literature, but in this particular Cuchulainn place, like, people are saying, like, the Celts aren't sharing beds just to be warm. Come on now. The sexual mythos of the Celts is quite strong. They had, there wasn't any shame attached to their sexuality, so the matter-of-fact way that it was stated backs up how we feel that the Celts were in through their mythos in general with regards to sexuality. Now, Cuchulainn had many lovers, and most of them were female. So, technically speaking, he would be considered to be a bisexual male who was the favoured warrior of the goddess Morrigan. So, again, this is a source in history, in mythology, and there are problems with any source from history, because you can say, who wrote it? Are we interpreting it right? Has it got mixed around at some point in history? The Celts were from an oral tradition, so it could have shifted and changed over time. Are we looking at the etymology of the word correctly? And all those sorts of problems that come from a literary point of view, that when you start with a historical reference, that you have problems with it. But there are examples here in this mythos to support her favourite warrior being bisexual. So, now we're going to move into how I want to talk to people and how I want to feel it out with you guys. And I've given you a couple of historical references and a little bit of historical mythological lore to sort of back that there is examples of this within the mythos, over what some of a pagan path is based. And I have huge problems with people who refuse things that aren't in the law whatsoever because of the passage of time since mythos, and it's not necessarily 100% relevant to modern times. It's an interesting place to start. It's an interesting history lesson. It's definitely worth looking into and pulling symbolism, meaning, and connection even to the goddess Morrigan through her mythos. But it is not the be-all and end-all. I just don't believe that, and I get problematic. Well, that's probably true. I get problematic when people suggest that, that's the case, that there's only the mythos, and if you take anything from outside the mythos, then you must be wrong. And I'm always hesitant to say that anybody's experiences are wrong or correct when it comes to working with the goddess Morrigan. I've said it on many occasions that I don't feel I have the right to tell people that yes, the goddess Morrigan is calling them, just very much as I don't have the right to say no, she isn't, because that's her business. And more than that, it's your business to figure out. It's usually a test. And when people come to me, I'm sure I'm quite aggravating, because they come to me saying, wanting a definite yes or no, and I'm like, well, maybe. You have to figure it out, you have to discover it. I will point out that if, it's just crows that you're seeing, that there are many gods and goddesses who are associated with crows, and we can't say that, you know, I've been seeing crows everywhere, it's definitely Morrigan, because I think that's jumping the gun a bit. There are usually many signs rather than just crows. And people who get close to sons and daughters of the Morrigan may find themselves bombarded with crows, because the Morrigan takes an interest in her sons and daughters' lives, and if I'm interested in somebody, that's happening to Jess, poor Jess. I think Jess is amazing, and I think she's an incredible soul, an incredible spirit, and I feel like she's my soul sister over the sea, that we're getting to know each other, but I'm like, I feel a spirit, if that makes sense. She is currently being stalked by crows everywhere, so Mama's definitely like, we're watching you. That's what I post every time, and she's like, there are crows everywhere. I'm like, we're watching. Creepy. Side note, anyway, back to being on point. So I am very hesitant to ever say that something is correct or wrong when it comes to modern practices working within Celtic witchcraft frames and following a path about the goddess Morrigan. Telling people that they cannot follow the goddess Morrigan because they are homosexual or bisexual is just wrong. Who gives anybody the goddamn right to say that sort of thing to people? That's heinous. It's heinous. I've took this long because I've been so mad about it that I was like, if I make a video, like when I first found out about it, I mean, I was tired from moving and all the rest of it anyway, but I would have been swearing and all the rest of it. It's nobody's business. Nobody has the right to tell you who you can and cannot love, within reason, obviously. I always feel that I need to put a disclaimer in when we're talking about sexual relationships, because undoubtedly there are people who take it to the, you know, extremes which are abusive. Oh well, are you saying you support paedophiles then? No, absolutely not. There's a, you know, under the goddess Morrigan, it's between 2 or more consenting adults, where, and I think that's probably all that she would require. I feel there is a moralistic aspect, that there needs to be a love and a passion there, and it needs to be a connection, I feel. It's not going to be true all the time, and it will differ from person to person, but I have found that many followers of the Morrigan form very strong, deep bonds to people whom they truly love and truly desire, and it goes beyond just being sexual. It becomes a much deeper connection, and I think that's based on many different things, but I think a lot of us that have been chosen by the goddess Morrigan have lived through trauma, have lived through abuse of one kind or another. So when we do open our hearts to someone, and when we do wish to engage with someone sexually, there is a whole ton of more meaning behind it than it just a passing fancy type relationship. And I think that comes from having overcome all of these battles within our own lives, and that takes on a shade within our relationships and sexuality then. And basically we've won all of those wars, and that's part of what the goddess Morrigan sees, and part of why she calls to us, and maybe even part because we are following her, that we are tested and go through trials. And I've talked about that in a lot of detail and a lot of depth in other videos, so I'm not going to, you know, overhash that over again. But each individual's trials and battles of a personal nature are their own to overcome, and I think it's very, I want to say it's very possible and very likely, but to be honest, I know people who are of either a homosexual or lesbian orientation and have struggled with that, have overcome that, have dealt with all the difficulties that come with overcoming it, having grown up in perhaps an environment where it wasn't accepted, where it was where they were bullied, abused, downtrodden, all of the things that come with hate, basically, and they have overcome that as part of their life path, their life journey, and they get to the point where they accept themselves and love themselves and are open about their sexuality. And they feel that the goddess Morrigan has been there, stood there behind them, 100% of the journey of helping them to grow into who they are meant to be. And I fully believe that they have been through all of these processes. I've been through sexual journeys of the inner soul, and mine are different. So mine are from a heterosexual perspective, but because I was abused as a kid by my father, it meant that I had a whole different set of problems with regards to sexuality and trusting people, and feeling sexual without feeling horror, basically, in a nutshell. And that's a very personal journey, a very difficult journey, a very traumatic experience that the goddess Morrigan has helped me through, and it's part of, I put my pain on the altar and offer it up, and she, you know, kills it. She kills that off, that pain, and transforms it, and that's part of the, you know, shadow work processes of healing past really difficult sexual connections, and how it is incredibly, and has been incredibly difficult for me to be sexually open because of all the horror in my past. And it basically gives me a completely different memories to overcome and set of issues, basically. But what the parallel here is that I understand the feeling of being troubled and having to overcome other people's judgment and having issues within the sexual realm that one has to overcome in order to be happy. And they're not the same in terms of what they actually are. And obviously everybody's sexual awakenings and coming to grips with who they are sexually and finding and connecting to people whom they love is going to be different from person to person. You can't ever say, you know, there is one way of doing things, because there just isn't. But what I'm trying to get across is that we all, under the Morrigan and under any god and goddess, under humanity, to be honest, we all go through processes of coming to terms with whom we are sexually, and in other ways, obviously, but for the focus of this video. And it's also about identity, because coming into who we are as an adult, as a individual, is the awakening of self. So the awakening of self differs from individual to individual. And under a path of the goddess Morrigan, the awakening of self is very much where a lot of the focus of her is. And sometimes that's not pleasant. Sometimes it's a trial, sometimes it's trial by combat, sometimes it's trial by fire. And you will work out who you are, you will get to grips with every inch of yourself. You will be torn down and rebuilt, and you will rebuild yourself, and you will know all those intricate pieces of who you are because you rebuilt yourself. And that's kind of how it felt for me. And so that happens with every individual. Now, if a person is therefore struggling with their sexuality or their gender, then this is just part of the struggle for self, the struggle for identity. And I think death goddesses, and the goddess Morrigan in particular, have a lot to say about identity. I think that they are very, very strong and proud in their aura, and they're not going to be belittled, they're not going to be stereotyped, they're not going to be put in a box. And the minute you try and put them in the box, you will probably get blown up from the inside or ignored, because they know who they are. And that's always evolving and shifting, of course, but at the core, they are very strong. They are very of themselves, and we, the human beings, are limited in our perspective, in our understanding. So it's like, it's not our fault that you don't understand us fully. It's human nature, you know. We see deity through the lens of our own experience. Now, when the goddess Morrigan first appeared to me visually, I thought it was a guy, I thought it was a man, and she appeared as a man and it was covered down there, crow mask, and sounded like a man. I thought at the beginning it was a messenger from her. It was like she didn't deign to come herself. It was like a messenger, and later I realised it was her. And it was a little bit of, you know, trickery, a little bit of perception and shape-shifting. It's a little bit of a test, a trial, just to overcome what you think are strict, specific gender roles. And as far as I'm concerned, gods and goddesses are male and female, and neither and both, all in one energy. And like I said, it's limited human perspective. We categorize things in terms of masculinity and femininity, and we then categorize what things count as masculine and feminine to crazy levels. We need to categorize it, put it all in boxes, what it means to be feminine, what it means to be masculine, what colors are feminine, what colors are masculine, what ways of dressing, what ways of speaking, what ways of, I don't know, eating, exercising, the whole lot. You can categorize just about every facet of human life into what is masculine and what is feminine. And it's a very human need to categorize, and we need to sort of get rid of it, really, because it hinders more than it helps. And as far as I'm concerned, the goddess Morrigan embodies masculine and feminine energies within herself, in however we understand it. Gods and goddesses are both, and neither, and beyond that, and above all that. And the way that they interact with us is kind of on our level. Like, take it down to their level so they get it, get the lessons. So I think the idea of basically somebody telling another individual the Morrigan's will concerning sexuality, saying that she wouldn't take you, she wouldn't approve of you, she wouldn't love you because you are LGBT, I think you need better friends, basically. It's horrendous. It's a horrendously wrong thing to tell an individual, that their very core of self is wrong. Who the heck is anybody to say that to another individual? It's ugh. All the goddess Morrigan cares about, and this is a piece of advice that I gave to the individual. All the goddess Morrigan cares about is love in its form, and is sex in its form, and is who you are as an honourable individual. And to be honest, if the goddess Morrigan sees you, and you will know if she calls to you, because it's very defined. It's not subtle most of the time. There is a subtlety sometimes. There is all this clues, and work it out for yourself energy to things. But if she sees you at the core of who you are, and accepts you and comes into your life and says, you know, I want to work with you, or you are my son, or you are my daughter, and I'm going to help you build yourself up from the ashes of who you used to be, of who you don't need to be, of all the things that are holding you back, and we are going to, you know, trial by fire, trial by combat, we're going to build you up into the individual that you're meant to be. And if you are meant to be LGBT, then you are meant to be LGBT. We all go through different life experiences, And I believe in reincarnation. Some people are dismissive of it, but to me it makes the most sense. That we are supposed to experience all these different elements, these different ways of being, these different lives in order to become closer to the divine, to elevate ourselves throughout many, many lifetimes. I don't think it's possible in one lifetime. It's too much to do for one little lifetime, you know. And that, I think, is what is at the core of how I feel about experiences of sexuality, is that the goddess Morrigan, I've heard some derogatory statements about the goddess in my time, some stuff that's, you know, portrayed. Oh well, my favourite from yesterday is, if you're gothic, then the Morrigan's for you. Pardon? And this to me is in that same level of basic nonsense. People wishing to alienate, hurt and spread hate, I think, basically is what is going on. I can't speak to whether or not the goddess Morrigan will call you or will speak to you. I can't speak to who you are as an individual. I can't speak to your experiences. But I can say with a definite, resounding positivity, I guess, that she absolutely does call to people who are LGBT. Some of the most incredible people I know, but even on YouTube, are LGBT and have a relationship with Morrigan. Look at Ember, who is proudly married to a woman. And I know 3 or 4 very, very strong males who just happen to be homosexual who work with the goddess Morrigan. And they're incredible human beings. And the idea of anybody saying, you know, oh well, you can't because this is really limiting, is really biased, and is hateful. It's just hateful. It's just, we need to stop this crap. It's just, it's new. If you're happy and you're healthy and you're loved and this is who you are, you embrace who you are. And I swear to you, the goddess Morrigan will embrace you for who you are. She sees, she's the all-seeing. She sees every element of ourselves and tests us and forces us to be who we're meant to be. And if that's who you're meant to be, then own that, love it, and shine on. Right, so that's it for this video. Again, apologies for the crazy lighting. It's like, whoa. But yeah, and now I have to get a bit closer because I'm further away from the camera now. So at the end of videos, you'll see me shuffling up like, many blessings.